Hello crafty people, it's Sharon here, and today I'm bringing a new video featuring a stamp that I haven't used before on this channel, but I've been dying to play around with for ages, and that is a beautiful house mouse stamp which you can see here. You might have seen my video short giving a teaser on this one. We're going to colour it in today using alcohol markers and create a framework or a background for it with some inks. So we've got a bit of inky blending and some lovely colouring for you today. So this is the stamp that I'm using, which you can find online. It's called Amanda and Monica, and the code is RSC009. Party time. Sorry, it's called Party Time. So there we go, and these are a little bit different to the stamps that I usually use because these are red rubber stamps that are mounted onto some sponge, so they've got a bit more cushioning on than usual. They're really lovely to stamp with, but you follow the same rules that you would with your normal stamping and use a VersaFine ink if you're going to do watercolouring, or if like me you're going to be doing alcohol colouring, you use a Memento ink pad. And here's an example of a card that I've coloured already using that stamp, and as you can see this is a C5 card, so that image pretty much takes up the whole card. It's quite sizable, really nice to use. I'm going to colour in a similar sort of fashion, but I'm going to apply it to a different card just so you can see a different style that we can create with the very same image. So without further ado, let's bring in my pre-stamped image, which I have coloured with Memento inks, as I mentioned before. I'm going to use a combination of ink markers this time. I'm going to use some Ohuhu brush markers, which will cover up a lot of space quickly, but I also want to put some detail in with some fur, and for that I want a finer nib, so I'm going to bring in a few of my tri-blend markers as well. So let's begin and see how we go with colouring in these cute creatures. I'm going to start with colouring in the mice bodies, and the reason for this is I want to get a base coat down, and then I want to allow that to dry a little bit so that when I apply my thinner markers to make strokes to represent the fur, it's not going to blend too much. So I'm just going to bring you in a little bit closer so you can have a closer look at our big mouse just here. There we go. And I'm going to start with my Ohuhu pen, and I'm going to go for a pale beigey colour, which is E210. And I'm using my brush pen this time, my brush side, and I'm just going to give a good colour all over what would be the fur, but I'm avoiding the skin bits just for now. But what you can do is you can wiggle so that you're softening that edge if you want to. And as I get to the edges on the back here, I'm just doing a few flicks out so that we haven't got a dead solid line where the fur comes to an end. And I'm going to keep going all the way. You could leave a little pink belly if you wanted to, but I'm actually going to opt for colouring all over for this one. Just avoiding his little hand there. And really, because there's so much detail on these stamps, you can get away with doing almost nothing. So if you're not really confident or into shading too much, you can actually get away with just colouring them flat and letting the stamp speak for itself. But what I'm going to do is add some extra around where I think it might be a bit shady. And this time I'm not colouring it fully necessarily. I'm going to sort of leave areas with the pale showing through just to give that feeling of fur again, really. And I'm going all different directions. I'm not sticking one way or another. what you start to see is that you've got a bit of sort of pattern coming through. I'm also going to go into this lighter area and I'm just going to add some extra. I didn't do that on my previous one, but we'll see how that goes. And that was E240, in case anybody is wondering. And then I'm just going to go back to my pale colour, which is E210. I'm going to go back over that bit in the middle. There we go. And I'm just going to come in very slightly around the edges of the face there. Up the ear, sorry, not the nose. And we'll leave that be for now, because what we want now is for this to dry out a little bit. So now I've got a skin tone colour, and that is E090. And I'm having a bit of trouble with the lid. There we go. And this time I'm going to go in and colour what would be the skin areas. So again, I'm colouring this flat all over. And it looks a bit dark at the minute, but it's going to fade as it dries. But what I'm doing is I'm just going over those edges just to soften the edge there. I'm going to go onto the ear. And this is the sort of inside of the ear, so it would be kind of pinky. But what I think I might do is just go and colour what would be the outer ridge of the ear with this darker brown, like so. There we go. And we also have a tail, hands and feet to deal with. So here's the hand. And again, where that joins, I'm just giving a little circular motions just to blend a little bit more. I've got a very fine tail. And again, don't be afraid to move your card around so that it feels comfortable for you to move your hand in a way that helps you to actually do that colouring. And as you can see, I'm just going over all of it really. There. Now I'm going to go back up to that ear and I'm just going to add a second layer, and I'm going to add a second layer here just to provide a little bit of delicate shade. And on the tail we get given a clue because there are dark lines showing us where the shade would be. There we go. So that's very easy to do. If you just let your first layer dry a little bit first, just for a second or two, you can add some extra on the top. So let's just bring this up so you can see the mouse so far. So with some very basic colouring, we've got a mouse coming to life in front of our eyes. The next thing I'm going to do is bring in some shading just to add some further shade to the face and ears. And for that I'm going to use a tri-blend pen just because it had the sort of colour that I kind of wanted, which was a browny grey. So I am picking the, I don't think I can get it to focus. There we go, brown grey blend. And I'm using the lightest colour, which is BG2. You can use anything that you've got to hand, but the key with this is I was looking for sort of brownish grey rather than a dark bluish grey. And with that I'm just going to add some little bits of shade around the edge of my mouse where I think there might be shade. So where this party popper's going towards his head, that's going to cast a bit of a shadow under his chin, and I've just put his nose in just for the sake of it really. Inner part of his ear is going to be cast into shadow, and the hand where it's furthest away, the dark bit of the tail where those indication lines of shadow are already, and maybe I'll just do this one as well. And then I'm going to add a bit more shading down where his feet, because his body, his little plump tummy and his little round legs are going to cast a bit of shadow over him. And that will probably blend pretty much by itself, But if you want to just soften that up, you just go back to your flesh colour pen and just touch around the edges just to wake up that colour, just to wet it a little bit, and you'll find that you can actually soften those edges. And all you need is the slightest touch. You don't want to be scrubbing away, because you'll actually blend out the colour altogether. Right, let's move over to our other mouse and do the same thing. So I'm starting with my palest colour, E210, and I'm going to go all over his body, and then having a little look at his ear here. This one is the outside of the ear and this one is the inside of the ear. So I'm just going to colour that fold but cover the whole of the ear behind it. And that was a mistake that I made when I first coloured this in. I did them both as insides and I realised I had to kind of colour over the top. But you'd never know, so it doesn't really matter. So this time I'm going around doing some little swipes. I'm just adding a few on here because I realised I didn't do that all the way around. Right. So I'm adding some little swipes around the edge to soften those edges, and so I haven't got a hard line around the body of my mouse. And then I'm just going to fill it all in once again. Done. Now it's time for my darker shade, and I'm kind of looking where there's more dense lines and things like that, and thinking about where would it look darkest. And generally, as a rule of thumb, we try and make it so that the faces of our characters are always in the light. So that's why I'm imagining the light's kind of down here, and the light shining on his face there and on his face there. And the reason why we do that is because it kind of brings the characters to life. If their faces are in the dark, you can't see their personality so well, shall we say. So it's really worth doing that, and just, even, you know, it's not about following the rules or anything like that, because sometimes it doesn't fit in with the rules, but it definitely, I think, gives a much better overall look. And what we can do is we can intensify that colour further down where we think, to start off that sort of shadowing process. And really, I'm just playing around and flicking. Every one is going to come out a little bit different. And I'm going to go back to my pale colour once more, just to blend some of this in, and also to blend this edge on my mouse's ear. And then I'm going to go on to the pink bits next. So again, same process. We're going to colour all of the pinky parts, just being careful of his eye, because on this one his eye's open, and I'm just going out into the fur a little bit just to soften that off, and then very lightly touching in his fingers. I'm going to have to turn this around a little bit now because that's easier for me. Let's get his little tail in. There's his the heel of one foot and his little toes sticking out there, and then we've got the main foot. Once again, I'm just dragging into the fur of the body just to get that all merging together. Now I can see, as you can see, I've added this more dense dark colour on my mouse here. I like that better than this one, to be fair, because it gives a bit more shape. So I'm going to go back in with my darker brown, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'm just going to add some darker areas, and what this will also do will help his paw or his hand stick out better, and the arm as well. So I'm just doing some circular motions. I'm not being too particular about it. I'm really just scribbling. And I'm going to do the same at the back of his arm. and in front of his arm. There we go. And that's just given him a little bit more depth, I think, than he had before. Now I know it looks a bit rough and ready at the moment, but we're going to add some flicks onto this with a finer pen in a moment, which will actually make that look better. But meanwhile, now that the pinky bit's dried a bit, I can go in and add some extra depth like I did before. So just bringing in some extra. Same pen, just another layer added. And I'm going to swap it round for the tail once again. And then I'm going to go with my BG2 from my tri-blend set, and I'm going to add that shade in. And I'm actually going to add some on this ear over here as well. There we go, just to give a bit more shading. And I'm going to give him a little grey nose. And these little touches will make the world of difference in terms of adding dimension to your character. So although I'm really just drawing a line in the dark areas, it does make quite a difference. There we go. So we have our two mice well underway. Now we're going to start to add some fur. And again, I'm going to use a tri-blend pen simply because it's got a fine point on it. So for this I'm going to use my earth brown blend, and I think I'm probably going to use the medium and the dark colour. And so I'm going to start with my medium, and I'm just basically going to start to add some flicks of texture. And because this has been allowed to dry for a while, hopefully they're not going to blend in too much. What that's going to do is just add some definition and colour. And what we're going to do is follow the sort of lines that have been provided to show that fur, but we're also going to flick around a bit so that it looks a little bit messy. We don't want loads of straight identical lines, and sometimes I'm going to flick out onto these stray little bits on the outside here. And I'm just keeping in mind, I'm trying to keep some light and shade as well. And I'm just putting, in the lighter areas, I'm putting less of these little brown streaks. And then I'm going to go over and do the same on my little mouse over here. And you can spend, you know, as much or as little time as you want on this. But just remember that you do need to put some flicks into the lighter areas as well. We don't want too much of a solid line. We want to make it kind of look a little bit realistic if we can. If you can call a mouse holding a party popper realistic, I don't know. And that was my medium colour. Now I'm going to go with my dark colour, and I'm just going to enhance that a bit further. With my darkest shade, but I'm not using it so much. But what you can do is use it just to get into those little areas to highlight his hand a little bit more as well. There we go. So that's him. We can leave that to settle for a minute and come back and add some more if you want to. And then back to our little mouse. So really the thing of colouring fur can seem quite daunting and scary to a lot of people, but actually it's not that bad at all, because all you're doing is little tiny flicks, you know, it's not detail colouring, so it's much easier than you might imagine. And with these little stamps, they really give you everything you need. You know, like I say, you could colour them completely flat without shading. They would look beautiful. Or you can go into more detail like we are here. And or somewhere in between, whatever suits you. Now what I might do is just to add some extra shade is go back to my BGs, but I'm going to go in with my darkest one. And I'm just going to bring that in round the arm there and under the chin, under the arm, and it's subtle because it's not that much of a dark colour, but it just adds a little bit of definition where we might have lost it. So I'm really just playing around with it, just adding in. I'm drawing a line around and flicking until I feel like I've got a little bit of contrast there. So hopefully, it is very subtle, but hopefully you can see just around this area here where I've coloured that grey in. And if you look over here, let's do a before and after. I haven't coloured anything in yet on him with the grey, so I'm going to do that now. Just see if you can see how that works. So I'm kind of edging his arm so that we can see. And round the back there where the darkest areas will be, where the light is least likely to be. And that's probably all we need. And I can fade it out with a few flicks if that's what I want to do. Maybe I'll just do a little bit under here as well. And that's the after. So he's just got a little bit more depth to him now. And I think that's probably about it for our mice. So the next thing we're going to do is move on to the decorations. So we've got a lovely party popper to do here and some little bits of confetti and some ground, of course. So let's do that next. So I'm going to start off with the little mouthpiece of my party popper and some of these confetti, and I'm going to do those in a yellowish goldy colour. So for that I have picked Y1 and Y3 from my Ohuhu markers, and I'm also going to bring in a little bit of extra shading with a pencil. This is also an Ohuhu pencil, but you could use anything that you've got to hand. They're new, they're called Halava pencils, very inexpensive, and they're wax based, I think, either wax or oil. So they're really nice to use. I haven't used them much yet, but what I have used, I really like them. So I may come back in future with a pencil coloured creation on some craft card or something like that, because I think they'll be really good for that. But meanwhile, we're going to use this to add a bit more delicate shading onto our party popper. So first of all, I'm going to go with my light colour, which is Y3. And I'm just taking a moment to double check and make sure it is the light colour. Yes, it is. Just on a piece of card on the side. And I'm just going to go in with that colour. So it's a yellow, but it's a golden yellow, a little bit of a browny tinge to it. I didn't want a bright yellow as such. And I'm going to colour some of these little confettis as well. Let's do this one over in the corner. And you could do the confetti a different colour altogether, but I'm trying to keep to a fairly limited colour palette here. Okay, I'm going to go with my darker yellow, which is Y1. And I'm just going to add, again, using these dotted lines, these dots and things as a guide, I'm adding some shade. I'm going to add some shade onto my little bits of confetti, which is really easy to do. I'm just adding a line on a corner basically. No blending at all. But if we look up here, we've got some contrast, but not really enough to really show that shading. So we could go in with a darker marker, but as it's going to be a very small area, this is where my pencil's coming in, and I'm just going to very lightly start to add some extra shade on the edges there. And what I can do is I can press harder at the edge, at the darkest edge, and then just fade out, which gives me a bit more flexibility, I guess you might say. And that's the nice thing about the pencils. When you do it in a round and round motion like this, it's called scumbling. So again, I'm just going to really darken some areas. What I would say is start light, and then if you want some more, press down a little bit more, because one thing with pencils, once you put it down, you can't really take it away. So there we go. So now we've got a bit more shade on our party popper, and I might just add some little extra bits on my confetti, especially where it's sitting behind a fold of paper or something like that. And as you can see, I'm not really making much effort with this. I'm literally just scribbling a few lines around, and that's just giving me a little bit extra, which I find really helpful with yellows for some reason. Now we'll go on to the main party popper, and for this I'm going to use some shades of blue. Sorry, excuse me. I've got 3 here, which I may or may not use. I've got, let's put them all the right way round, BO30, BO50 and PB6. So I'm going to use my confetti as testers, purely because it's if they go a bit wrong, it's not really going to notice, you know. So I'm putting my lightest colour in. And then I'm going to go with my mid colour. So I'm using this kind of as a tester, really. And then I've got my darker colour, PB6, which is really quite dark. So if I put that in, I think that might be a little bit too much. But of course we can fade it out. But an alternative option is to use a pencil. So I've got another one from my Ohuhu set, and I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow. So again, I can do this in a much more delicate fashion, which is really helpful on these little tiny bits here. And there we go. And indeed, if you wanted to add more texture to your mice, you could find a dark brown pencil and do exactly the same, add flicks and things like that. Now I'm going to go back onto my main party popper, and I'm going to give it a coat with my palest colour all over. Just being careful near the face. I don't want to bleed my blue into his face if I can help it. There we go, one party popper. Now I'm going to use the mid colour, and with the help of the hints given by these little dark dots and things, I'm going to add some depth. So really the inside of the party popper is going to be quite dark, and the edges, because this is a round party popper, I'm just doing some edges and these bits down here, so I'm just going back over those again. And in this case I feel like I do need a bit more. This is a bigger area than the confetti, so I'm just going to add some of this darker blue in the areas that I think would be quite dark, just to add some contrast. Again, being guided by the little dots that represent the shading. I'll just put a tiny amount on here because this really is quite a strong colour. And I need to now go back to my mid colour and blend that out a little bit. So I'm going to go straight over the top of it and really bring that out. But it is a very intense colour. And I'm going to just blend the edges of my party popper here, just to bring that out. And I'm going to bring in my little blue pencil once again, and I'm just going to try and bridge the gap a little bit between that really dark blue and the mid blue. And I'm going in quite hard this time, quite, not really hard, but you know, harder. And hopefully that's just going to soften off those edges. And the pencil can then be faded out. So I'm adding a nice lot of contrast there, and I've actually made a much darker party popper overall, I think, than I did on my previous example, and that's fine because, you know, we don't want them all to be perfectly identical necessarily. There we go. So we've got the main parts coloured. Now we need to make sure we put them on the ground, and for that I'm going to use two sort of neutral colours, and these are YG040 and YG080. And for ground, I think a brush or a wedge nib is an absolute must, because you want to be able to cover a large amount of area and you don't want it to be too obvious where it begins and where it ends, and these sort of pens with the brush or the wedge are perfect for that. So I'm going to start by just using my palest colour, and I'm just kind of scribbling around my mice, trying to be careful not to go over the mouse itself, and I'm making sure they're kind of on the ground, not sitting, they're within the ground, shall we say, not sitting hovering on top of it. And the way I do that is I bring that ground line just up past their feet so that they're in the middle of the floor. I hope that makes some sort of sense. So again, it doesn't have to be a perfect line. We don't want a dead straight line really. We want it to be kind of a little bit soft and quirky, because that's what these characters are. So I'm just sort of swiping around, and you can see that my line at the top is not perfect. It's wobbly. There we go. And I think that adds a bit more character and realism rather than just like kind of getting a ruler and drawing a dead straight line. And because he's bigger, this mouse, the ground is kind of higher on this side, and it's like it's sloping down towards our little guy on the right. There we go. Now if you didn't like those edges too much, you could then go in with a blender pen and just run around the edges, and that will soften and blend those out. But I actually quite like it like that for the purpose of this little picture here. So I'm now going to go with my darker pen, and I'm going to add a little bit of darker shade, again indicated by the lovely little dots, to just give a little bit of texture and to really sort of ground these guys. They're going to cast a shadow. If you don't want to, you don't have to do that. It's just a little extra. And then I'm going to go back to my lighter pen and just soften out those edges a little bit. And I'm not being too particular about it. I'm not spending ages working it. So again, ground can be ever so easy, but without that little extra bit, you would find that they would be floating, and something about them wouldn't look quite right. There we go. So our colouring is just about complete really. The next thing we're going to do is add some colour around, just so that these guys are kind of highlighted in the middle. But before I do that, I think I'm going to get a sentiment and stamp it up here, just so that I can see where my sentiment's going to be. So I'll come back to you once I've got that in place, and we'll carry on with our little story. Okay, so I've now stamped my sentiment here, and just in case you're interested, what I've used is a woodware stamp from this collection here. I really love these because they're just quirky and fun, and the fonts are a little bit different to what you might see elsewhere. This one's called FRM073 Extra Birthdays, in case anybody was interested. So we're now ready to move on to kind of try and frame these guys a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to use a Distress ink and a Harmony ink, I think. Sorry, yep, Harmony inks, which are from Craft's Companion. And what I intend to do is just start going all around the edge so that this white area in the middle is kind of white. And then that highlights, it puts the spotlight, almost like a spotlight is going down on the characters. So I'm going to start with a pale colour, and this one's called Straw Bale. You could use any dye-based ink that you've got, so anything similar, such as Distress or Lisa Horton or something like that. And then just using a blending brush, I'm starting off on my glass mat and I'm working my way around. And what will happen is that if you work from the edge, it will naturally fade as you get towards the middle. And I'm going all the way around, including this area on the floor that I've left blank. And I'm kind of working it more into the corners and fading as I get into the centre of each edge of my card. And I'm also just going to bring some of that up here. I'm not worrying about going over the top of my ink because this is very light and translucent sort of colour, so it's not going to hurt at all. And it's not all perfectly even. I'm literally just randomly adding some colour. And there you can see, when you sort of take a step back and have a look, you can start to see that it's kind of highlighting our characters in the middle. And what I've done is I've kind of worked it. I haven't left my my sentiment completely white, but I have gone into it a little bit, but I didn't completely cover it. I want that to be part of the bit that's being drawn attention to, if you like. Now this, as I say, this is quite a pale colour, so there's only so far you can go with it. So I'm going to bring in another colour which is called Honey Pot, and it's similar colour but sort of darker, and I'm going to go in on the edges again just to darken that even more, but I'm not going to go as far. And what you can see, that's really picking up on the edges there, which is quite nice. And this too will blend and fade with that paler ink as we move to the centre of the card. Working my way around. There we go. And now that we've got that darker bit of contrast there, we can sort of see the white in the middle is more prominent. So that's that little bit. I'm going to just clean up my mat. And now I'm going to add a little bit of life and movement to my picture with some splatter, and for this I'm going to use a distressing in Mermaid Lagoon, which kind of is a similar colour to my party popper. And for that I'm going to just put some directly onto my glass mat or onto a plate, or anything that's water resistant that you've got. And we're going to need a little bit of water and either a fan brush or a round brush. I'm going to dip my fan brush into the water, make sure it's nice and wet, just take off the excess, pick up some of that blue, and then holding my brush quite far away from the actual brush tip, I'm going to keep my hand steady and then tap with my other hand to make this splatter appear. And I'm going to go from bottom left to top right. And if I want to add some more, go back in. There we are. I'm going to go right off the bottom corner here. Now, if it's gone a little bit on his hand and you don't want it there, you can just blot up quickly, or you could just cover. But I kind of think it looks a bit more realistic if it's kind of going over them rather than around them, because you want to think of something's popping and there's all stuff everywhere. So that's that done. And once again, a quick clean up. And we are ready to start mounting up. I'm going to have a little look, a little test, because I'm not sure if I want to do anything more to this picture. So here I've got a 7x7 card, and I've already matted and layered it, and I'm going to add this in here. And actually I think that looks fine as it is. I wasn't sure if I bring back this one here, if you look closely, I've edged it with my dark blue pen and I've done some doodling, but because I've got a raggedy edge on this particular one, I think I can probably get away without doing it. I can't quite decide if I want to put some doodling on. I think I'm going to leave it. So all that remains is for me to stick this back together. So I'm just going to use my wet glue, and then I'll come back with a final look at the finished card. So here we go, we've got our final finished card, just some basic matting and layering. And if you're interested in this particular nesting die, it came from All and Create, so you'll find that on their website. But there we go, that's just a way to show that with the same stamp and the same colouring, I've managed to create two different looks. So we have this one, and we have this little one here. Let's see if we can get them both in shot. And there we have it. Two beautiful house mouse cards. Hopefully not the last of the house mouse cards that I'll be doing. If you like them, let me know and I will make sure to do some more. But meanwhile, if you like what you've seen today, I'd love if you come and visit me again. Visit me on my channel and subscribe if you want to get reminders or want to have these videos come into your feed. I've got over 50 videos now, ranging from beginners through to advanced, so you're welcome to watch them, share them with your friends, do whatever you want to do. I'm happy to share the information around wherever you'd like to. So thank you for visiting me today and sticking with me as we did this colouring technique. I really hope to see you soon. Keep well everybody, and bye for now.